Hey everybody, it's Brian Traskos and Ani Anderson from Motivation Beyond Measure. And here we are doing a live stream this time for our summer Inner Game of Motivation series. And we're so happy that you're here with us. In past motivational MBM forum series of this summer, where we focused on the inner game of motivation, we've talked about things like overcoming fear and physical pain and growing financial revenue. So this week, we are going to talk about overcoming, managing, growing through things like stress and anxiety. So stress and anxiety are a lot of information going on right now in the world, obviously, with things like stress and anxiety. We're still living in a pandemic, folks, right? So COVID pandemic is still happening. There have been other high profile people coming out recently in the news talking about how they're dealing with things like anxiety challenges and stress challenges. So the whole idea of mental health, mental wellness is rising to the forefront in our awareness at this time in our lives. And, Ani and I have been doing this stuff for a really long time with people, and always engaging with people's bodies in some way in the process. Really, we're talking about some kind of somatic idea of processing things somatically and helping people to be able to manage themselves. And of course, cross mapping is a tool we use primarily to help people manage things like stress and anxiety. So that's what we're going to focus on this week. We're going to share a couple of stories of people that we've helped and what they've done, how they've overcome, how they've grown, and the success that they've had. And also talk a little bit about stress and anxiety itself and the physiology around those sorts of things. So Ani, welcome.
Thank you. This is super fun to talk about. And actually, I was just thinking as I was listening to you, I was just on the phone with a client talking about anxiety and cross mapping. And, I had forgotten until I heard you introducing it. We use cross mapping so often for stress and anxiety. We have lots and lots of stories to share. But today we're going to be sharing a few case studies with you, whether you're watching live or watching the recording here. And I think, I'm really enjoying this series, Brian, where we're talking about case studies, because I think I've actually been really enjoying listening to case studies, especially in the pandemic. There's, before we were on information overload, now we're really on information overload. Hearing case studies is a really wonderful way to get information, but also, listen through story and through experience. So I'm really enjoying the format.
Yeah, maybe can we just talk just a moment about stress and about anxiety, because they seem to be linked together, but then they're also talked about separately. So maybe we can just kind of create a framework for how we're going to consider these things and talk about how we think about stress, specifically through the auspices of work that we do with folks, and of course with cross mapping as well. So can we just talk about how we define stress a little bit?
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and do that, and then I'll do my thing and show how it usually plays out in client scenarios.
Sure. So stress is something that a lot of people feel like is happening to them. Like, my kids are stressing me out, my spouse is stressing me out, my work is stressing me out, COVID-19 is stressing me out. Like, everything outside of us is stressing us internally. And so when we have that idea that something outside of us is stressing us or causing our stress, what we can end up doing a lot of times is trying to eliminate or change a thing outside of us that we believe is causing our stress. Now, I'm not saying that is never the case wholly, right? So there's always a relation between what goes on outside of us and inside of us as well. But what we want to make sure we do is release some of the attachment to that being the primary or sole cause for it. So the way we like to talk about stress is that stress is a physiological response in our bodies. So a stress response. So if we were measuring your biohormone levels and your blood chemistry and your brain waves, and all those sorts of things, you'd see changes in your body that would correlate with when you were to say, I feel stressed. And so a stress response is happening, something happens to us physiologically. But those physiologic changes also create changes for us cognitively. because of the biohormone level changes. They also create changes for us emotionally, again, because of the hormone and endocrine changes and neurological changes. So we end up experiencing it as a whole person, but we can certainly measure things physiologically. So the question is why are we having a stress response to begin with? If we go a little bit deeper than the idea that something is causing my stress, and I'm having a physiological response for it, what we really have to understand is that stress is really a response to a challenge of an internal belief system that we're having. And so when a belief system that we have grown to become, and sometimes we might consciously know what that belief system is, and other times we might not know what that belief system is. But if we're experiencing a stress response, then we really do know that that there is a belief system that we have aligned our life with that is being challenged in a significant enough way where we have a subconscious response to that challenge to try to help us meet and potentially overcome that challenge. So sometimes it's important to overcome whatever challenge is going on, like you're being chased by a rabid dog or something like that. Like, physiologically, it's important to be able to jump over the fence or get away from the dog. Now, other times when the stress becomes chronic, we have to start asking ourselves, is this really an environmental phenomenon like a rabid dog? Or is there something else going on that's challenging a belief system within ourselves that is no longer serving us? And so when we talk about stress responses, that's kind of the way that we like to frame it. Ani, want to add anything to that, or does that make sense?
Yeah, I think from a practical standpoint, how this shows up for clients a lot of times is, stress is a word that we use all the time now to describe all kinds of different felt qualities, right? But it can, in general, stress is something that people say when they feel overwhelmed.
Right.
Whereas anxiety is a different experience, right? It's this kind of like mild panic.
Sure. And people can experience anxiety as a part of a stress response. So for some people, when they're having that physiological stress response, the way that they describe the way that they know that they're having a stress response is because they're describing it as being anxiety. Right? Some people have tension in their neck, and that's how they say I'm having a stress response. And they wouldn't call that anxiety, but it's still the physiological responses that are associated with experiencing stress. So anxiety is kind of one of those things that people experience that also indicates that something within ourselves is being challenged in a profound enough way to make us want it to stop or change.
Yeah, and like you said, these are patterns that can just keep perpetuating themselves and become chronic. Right. So like one of the case studies that I want to bring up today, Brian, is actually about a person who contacted us specifically to help to get rid of anxiety. Mm-hmm. And so, that happens sometimes. Somebody experiences something long enough where it becomes a chronic issue. So as you're talking, it's interesting because a lot of times when we talk about cross mapping, we talk about how it's so good for chronic pain. And it's really good for chronic pain. And it's also good for a lot of emotional things. Well, we know that emotions have about a 20-minute shelf life, meaning if something happens in our environment and we have a reaction to it, that emotion will be within us for about 20 minutes before that it's done. The shelf life is done. And then if we still keep feeling that emotion, we're recreating it. So if we're recreating something, we know that we've got a pattern going on, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. And so I think it's so important to remember that, as you were saying about the external and the internal, because if something happens in our external environment after 20 minutes, if we're recreating that experience, there is so much we can do about it. And that goes back to when we talk about the natural laws of the universe, the natural law of cause and effect. And so one of the as we talk about the law of cause and effect, we do like to look at how a person, or I'll just use myself as an example for a second, how I'm being the cause of the effects that I'm getting in my life. There are a lot of, uncomfortable and challenging and esoteric ways to talk about that. But just from a standpoint of what we were talking about the emotions having a shelf life, after 20 minutes of having an emotional experience, I can know, I am being the cause of recreating this emotional experience. And there's so much empowerment that comes from that, because all of a sudden now I can do something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And really that shelf life on the emotions, that's actually an endocrinological endocrinological shelf life, right? So that's
Yeah.
that's a hormonal shelf life. So the hormones that are associated in our body, associated with anger, say, for instance, right? They are reabsorbed into the system after 20 minutes. If you just gave them a squirt in there, they would be reabsorbed. So if we are, again, going along in that, then we are perpetuating the process of that emotion, and we are rekindling the release of those hormones within our system that are then changing the way that we function, essentially.
Yep, exactly.
Right.
Yep. So when this person called me and told me that she wanted to help eliminate her anxiety, and I started asking some questions about it, I knew that it was a chronic problem. One of the ways I knew that it was a chronic problem is she was taking a bunch of medications.
Right.
Right. So it had been long enough in her life. She had tried to tackle it a number of different ways, which wasn't working. We hear this all the time as well, because even a lot of holistic methodology doesn't look at how to actually restructure patterns in the nervous system, right? So I might use lavender oil, for example, to calm my nervous system, and that's wonderful. But if it doesn't work from a sustainable point of view, we need to look at what patterns are happening perceptually so that I can reprogram my nervous system.
Right. Yeah. And so even when it comes to medications, I mean, what we want to say is we're not anti medication, right? Certainly that is the absolute best thing for people to do. And I will say that just like with lavender or with a pharmaceutical, the question always is, what do I need to do in order to no longer need this extra thing?
Yeah.
So when you think about a drug or a prescription, my question is, when someone says, well, my doctor put me on X, I think, you know what, that's great. My question would be for that person is, doc, what do I need to do to not need this anymore? What do I need to show you? Because I think pharmaceuticals are often used, again, as a way to not experience our body's messages that are trying to prompt us to have a deeper and more sustainable change in our lives. And so when we habitually use things that quiet, excessively quiet those messages, or try to shut down the messages, the body just finds another way to bring that forth. And typically those messages get louder and louder and louder and louder until, a lot of people will say that the universe had to hit them in the head with the 2x4 in order for them to make a change. And oftentimes really high levels of anxiety that people are experiencing, where now they're on multiple medications, is simply that process ballooning and exploding, because the medications weren't used as a way to help create almost like a level playing field to be able to do the work of deprogramming and repatterning what's causing the anxiety to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. I'm so glad you brought that up, because we are not anti-medication, but we do love to help people get off of medications, like you said. So, and we did help this person get off of anxiety medications and sleep medications, and those are the ones I'm remembering. I'm not sure if there were more. Anxiety is something interesting. I've heard this story over and over again. It's actually a story I heard this morning. People have anxiety type issues, like, for example, rapid heartbeat, like there's something going on. I think I'm having a heart attack or something like that. And they go to the doctor and they have multiple tests, and the doctors can't find anything wrong with them. And that can be a really disconcerting experience as the patient, because there's got to be something that's causing my problem. And so once we find the thing that we think is the cause, then I feel like I can do something. I've had patient after patient and client after client sit in my chair over the years as I've talked to them and say, I went to the doc, I had multiple tests done, and they don't know what's wrong with me. And boy, that is just a really tough place to be in as a human being. So I have so much reverence for anybody who's going through that, first of all. So anxiety is one of these things that I have seen this come up over and over again, where people are experiencing something might look like heart symptoms. They have tests that doctor doesn't know what's wrong with them. And then eventually they end up with a diagnosis of anxiety, which of course the whole process was incredibly anxiety provoking, right?
Yeah.
To go through. So something that I think is really important about this, and I hope it helps somebody who's watching today or watching the replay, is when you think about anxiety and the experience of anxiety in your body, But just think, if you're watching, just think about that for a second, because we've all experienced it at some point. Like, what does that feel like?
Mm-hmm.
So as we talk about what it feels like with clients, over and over again, they say things like, my heart's beating really rapid. I'm feeling sweaty. I feel a knot in my throat. I'm getting a headache. I'm feeling dizzy. With my eyes are like,
Mm-hmm.
kind of fuzzy. I've never, ever heard somebody tell me a felt quality of anxiety that's below the heart space. Yes, sometimes we get like the gut turning or something like that, but usually upon further investigation, that has something to do with the response that the anxiety is bringing down into the gut. So anxiety is something that we experience in the upper half of our body. I think that's really important to the conversation that we're having today, because when we talk about cross mapping, we're talking about the ability to recognize that we have a greater choice and empowerment about how we're feeling in any moment, whether it is something like stress or anxiety, or it's something like chronic pain. There is always an opportunity to feel a different experience than we're feeling. There's always an opportunity to find other experiences within our body that we can then focus on. So we tend to focus on the things that we're used to focusing on. We tend to focusing on the things that we think are going to help eliminate threat, right?
Mm-hmm.
So our body, our brain, our system, our mind is focused in on this experience of anxiety. And it's like looking through a, tunnel vision, when there's other experiences that we could possibly be paying attention to. We just need a cross-mapping practitioner to help us to point that out.
Right. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to continue on with the story. So go ahead.
Oh, no. No, go right ahead. I have some observations, but after your story.
Okay. So one of the things that we noticed right away with the client who was coming to us for anxiety was they had very little energy going on below their belt. They had very little, how do I want to say that? But like they were very often not paying attention to their feet on the ground, how their legs were feeling. Actually, their legs were skinnier than the rest of their body. They were a person who had kind of this bigger frame on top and spindly legs, which, I just, want to point out is fascinating, because the form of our body takes on our energy, things that are going on energetically within us. So that's just as a topic for another day, but it's interesting. So one of the very first things that we started to do was some cross mapping with this person to help them to focus on, pay attention to, have an awareness of the fact that there was another experience that they could be experiencing in the moment by paying attention to something lower down, the feet on the ground, my butt in the chair. And all of a sudden, this person started to experience something other than, I feel like I'm having anxiety and I either need to take a medication or I'm going to have a panic attack, right? I'm going to like blow. And so it was the first opportunity that they really started to see that they had choice. Do you want to say something before I continue on with the story?
No, keep going. It was great.
Okay. So what ended up happening was, well, a lot ended up happening actually. Yes, the person started recognizing that they had more choice. Yes, they started to have less anxiety, less panic attacks. Yes, we helped them to start to get off of their medications. And that happened because we were using CrossMap. Brian and I just got kicked off the stream, but it looks like I'm back. I'm not sure if he'll be back too, but we'll see. But it looks like we're still streaming. So let me just finish up the story. This client started to recognize that they had way more empowerment and choice in how they felt. And they started using cross mapping independently for themselves. Now, when they started to do that, what they recognized was that they actually felt like they weren't living on purpose most of the time in their lives. Brian?
Yeah, you there?
Yeah, was that you or me?
I think it's you.
You might lose me again. If we do, I'll have to close out. I was just relating the rest of the story, which was that this person ended up learning how to use cross mapping independently, and then determined that what was really going on was they didn't feel like they were living on purpose.
Yeah, can you just summarize that again for me, Ani?
Yeah. After this person started to cross map grounding energy rather than
Right.
anxiety, they started to learn how to use cross mapping independently, and then really realized what was really going on is they didn't feel like they were living on purpose.
So this is one of the cool things about cross mapping. Yeah, it's not a party trick, right? It's not like a one and done. It actually is, when used skillfully, it helps to start to release layers of experience that people have had. And really the cool thing about the cross mapping method too, which I really appreciate, is it helps a practitioner enter in exactly at the easiest point with a client. Instead of jumping in right in the hard stuff, and I know some people are like, oh, I just want to jump right in the deep end of the pool and just get going. And we might want to do that from a place where we want to help people deeply, but we have to realize that 90% of people have experienced significant trauma in their lives. And we have all kinds of complex defense mechanisms inside of us that don't allow us to go deep. And by the way, it can be further traumatizing. So something like cross mapping helps you to enter into very subtle, simple, non-threatening places to start with, and then helps people to, in a really trauma-sensitive way, help to start to peel back the layers of what they're experiencing, especially when we're talking about something like anxiety.
Yeah, also, people really need to come to their own aha moments. And so we can give people just the right aha moments in just the right time by following their body and their intuition. So when we used cross mapping with this client, she was not ready to hear and have the aha moment that I don't feel like I'm on purpose in, by the way, every aspect of my life. Let's just be clear.
Right.
Like, she was ready to have the aha moment that I could have another experience. And then once she started to have that as an experience, she started to have another aha moment. And the aha moments for a person's complete transformation, this person has completely transformed their lives, completely transformed their lives. We allow those aha moments to progress naturally because they're coming from their client's own intuition.
Exactly. Yeah. And I actually just had this conversation this morning with somebody, and that's exactly what we were talking about. He was talking about, he's a doctor of chiropractic medicine, and he was saying how he's over how people look to him for all the answers, right? How his patients come to him and want him to fix them. And he's kind of over that, and he wants to be in such a way where he can empower people better. And I said, as we were talking about cross mapping, I said, this is the beautiful thing about cross mapping and SBMC, is that, which is sensation-based motivation coaching, is that when we are working with clients, the clients are coming up with their own answers, with their own intuition, with their own guidance. They are authentically self-empowering themselves. And the practitioner becomes a guide of sorts through an inquiry process, through a attentional guiding process, that it's a process, it's a methodology. So it's very consistent in terms of how we go through it and the results that we get. And you enter it at different points, but once you're in that process, it's a very consistent process in order to get really consistent results as we do this. And again, someplace like anxiety is so important to consider this, because if you've ever experienced an anxiety, or if you've ever been around people who are experiencing anxiety, have you ever tried to talk somebody out of their anxiety? Or has anybody ever tried to talk you out of your anxiety? Like, how well does that work?
It just doesn't.
It doesn't work. And it actually feels really disrespectful.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does, because the feelings that we feel are real to us. I'm having this experience. And then what we end up saying is, you don't understand me.
Right. Yep. And then,
which is not helpful.
Right.
To anybody.
And then you get pushed away, and then we can't help people. So again, which is
and
what you were saying.
we further reinforce their patterns that they're broken and that no one understands them. And all of that stuff, it just further reinforces their patterns. I don't remember who said this. It might have been Gandhi, but don't quote me on it, because I don't remember those things. Einstein says, never remember anything you can't look up.
Yeah.
So it says, somebody said that, mark of a great leader isn't how many followers you have, but how many leaders you create. And I think that's really the new leadership model that we're really going to see coming into play. I think we're already seeing it, and we're going to continue to see it. And that's one of the things I love about cross-mapping methods and SBMC is we help people to be their own leaders. So let's think about people who don't consider themselves leaders very often: coaches, therapists, even doctors, chiropractors, natural holistic practitioners. All of these people are leaders. And one of the very clear reasons why is because people are coming with their problems to you. There you go.
Yeah.
You're a leader. So in that, I think that we could say experts like that are getting tired of the old leadership model where I'm the expert, fix me. But it's also just not working for anybody anymore. It's not working for the clients. It's not working for the practitioners. So stepping into this new model where we're creating leaders, we're creating self-leaders with every single client through empowering methodologies like this. So, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but another really powerful case study, Brian, that I had was a woman who hired me because she wanted to actually just feel better in her life, have more fun, like those kinds of things. And as the sessions progressed on and she went from program to program, she learned cross mapping. And one of the interesting things that came up for us was she ended up having some very traumatic things happen in her circumstances. And because she had tools like cross mapping, she could handle it. They were so difficult to deal with that for any of us, they would put us over the edge. And maybe, she as a mother, she had to handle things in her home that if she couldn't handle them, they'd have to do something with her too. And then she can't be present for her family. And she said to me, I am so thankful that I've worked with you over the years, because I never would have imagined that this could happen to me, but it did. And I'm prepared to handle it. I'm not saying it's hard, but I can handle it because of the work that I've done and the work that we did together. What in large part was, of course, SBMC, but cross mapping, because we're actively working on recognizing I have choice and I have an embodied choice in my body. I can choose to feel differently and then live a proactive rather than a reactive life. And so for all of us, we're all going to come up with tough stuff in life. And so I love, as a practitioner, knowing that I'm empowering my clients with tools that they can use even without me. Because they're empowered to become the cause and the cause of great effects in their life. Yeah,
that's a great story. What's occurring to me too, Ani, as we're talking about this, is we've both worked with people's bodies for a long time. I mean, I've been a physical therapist for 30 years and a massage therapist for 20 years. So I have had my hands on thousands and thousands of bodies over it feels like over the years. I'm sure you feel the same way. And one of the things that I used to struggle with, but I have not struggled with in a decade or more, is that people would come to me for chronic pain stuff. A lot of low back pain people would find me for, spine pain. And so you'd be having them on the table and you're working with them and you're working with their musculature, and then they start experiencing anxiety. either during the session or after the session. They came back and go, oh my God, like I really like that night my heart was pounding. And this has happened so many times. I mean, I can't even tell you how many numbers of times this has happened. And really what we're underprepared for as body workers most of the time is how like we're working with people's bodies, and we say, oh, a lot of times we quip and say, oh, your bodies hold emotions, and we just kind of go on with that.
So true.
We never realize, like, when we're working with our bodies, then all of a sudden these emotions come up and we have no clue what to do with them. Yeah. And it's overwhelming, and then people stop coming for treatments because we don't have a way to help them navigate what's coming up through the process of the body work. Cross-mapping. Yeah. This is why cross-mapping is so powerful, because it gives us a methodological way in order to help people navigate the anxiety and emotions that come up when we've been working with people's bodies.
Yeah. When you say that, I have so much resonance with that, because physical therapists, massage therapists, holistic practitioners have these experiences all the time, Brian, and they say things like, I really should go back to school for psychology. Right, and actually, number one, they don't want to be psychologists. That sounds like a good idea, but that's not really what they want to do. What they really want to do is understand energy medicine. They want to understand and be able to help people's emotional experience. That's really interesting to study and stuff. But you don't need a psychology degree. You don't need to go back to school for psychology to do that. You do need to understand energy. You need to understand energy and energy science to be able to do those kinds of things. For me, in my own practice, once I really started to understand the energetics and patterns and things like that, not only did I become a much better practitioner, I could handle just about anything that came in the door. Right. I really felt like I was making a difference for the first time. And I remember those days when people left my office and I wasn't really sure if I made a difference. And I feel really honored to have the experience where every single time I close down a client session in person, on Zoom, I know I've made a difference with people. And I know it's because I understand the energy science and how things like this work. And I do understand those psychological aspects of pattern creation and pattern reprogramming to be able to help people.
Yeah, 100% with everything that you're saying. And I mirror that right back at you. I loved when you said that's when you knew that you were really making a difference. And I would have to say I felt exactly the same way when I really started to understand better how to use somatic coaching skills as a part of my sessions, whether the sessions were in clinic and certainly virtual. The somatic coaching skills have been able to create so much freedom in my life. And by the way, freedom, I mean, because I wasn't tired or exhausted at the end of the day going home. I didn't feel like I was drained. I didn't feel like I overgave.
Yeah.
I felt like it was really more of a mutuality with myself and the client to help get them to a place that they really wanted to get to. Make things a lot more fun too, by the way, in terms of really that sense of exploration.
Yeah, I remember being tired as a practitioner too before I really started utilizing somatic coaching and SBMC, because it does take energy to be with people in those old ways. But with SBMC, like you were saying, and cross-mapping, it's life-giving. And so there's more energy to be had from the experience. It releases energy for all. So it's really wonderful. So I'm excited to have shared this experience with stress and anxiety and cross-mapping today with you, Brian. We have one last call in our series that we are going to do on Zoom. So, we decided to live stream today, but that's going to be on Zoom next week on the 25th, where we're going to be talking to Ann Lynch about some case studies that she has experienced with using cross-mapping for stress decompression, but also, Brian, with sleep.
Oh, cool.
And I haven't heard these stories yet, so I'm excited to hear them. Our graduates are doing so many interesting things with the methodology in all sectors. So it's always really exciting to share. I mean, for me too, I love hearing the stories because it gives me other ideas and examples of how work can be used. So whether you're watching, live or on the recording, we'd love to hear your questions, comments, and insights. Today, specifically because of the way that the internet was a little shaky, I didn't look at the chat to include your comments and things like that. So thank you for being here. We're really glad that you're here live. We hope that you'll share the recording. If you know somebody who this would be beneficial for, please share it. I'm going to be sharing it on my profiles on Facebook, because I think that this was a conversation specifically around anxiety that a lot of people need to hear. Even if they hear there's nothing wrong with you, right? And there are simple solutions so that you don't have to feel like you feel, that can powerfully transform your life, your family's life, certainly your business. But I think family is really what matters. You know, we talk to people all the time who are business people who tell us how much their family matters to them, their relationship with their kids, their relationship with their spouse. And oftentimes there is some kind of stress or anxiety that is a part of family living, and these kinds of things, you know, there are simple and really wonderful solutions to them. So
yeah, absolutely. So Ani, thanks so much for being here today. And I mean, we talk to each other every day, but it's always much fun to talk to you in this format as well, and share what discussions we have at home over the kitchen table with everyone else out there as well. So thank you so much for joining us, everybody, today. We really, really appreciate it. And we look forward to hearing your comments and talking with you soon.
The fall cohort for Cross Mapping Practitioner Certification is closing on Monday. If you're watching and you're interested in that, today's the day to contact us to get in on that. We'll see you soon, everybody. Thanks so much, and bye-bye.
Bye.